Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku triggered Doomsday mode. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air and ground gamma cracked with emerald lightning. It was a familiar sight at Yue High, a herald of progress, a symbol of hope. Izuku Midoriya, now in his second year, moved like a living storm. He was no longer the hesitant, bone-breaking boy who had first inherited One for All. He was its master. At a humming 45%, his body was a pillar of controlled power. Black Whip, once a chaotic and angry extension of his will, now flowed from his arms like disciplined ink in water. He shot a tendril towards a crumbling girder, anchoring himself mid-air. Float, his newest and most liberating quirk, held him suspended against gravity's pull. He was a constellation of his predecessor's gifts, burning brightly in the afternoon sun. Too slow, Deku! The voice was a roar wrapped in explosions, and it was the only warning Izuku needed. He twisted in the air, using a second Black Whip tendril to propel himself sideways just as a blast of concussive force tore through the space he'd just occupied. Katsuki Bakugo, a blur of orange and black, rocketed past him, his trajectory a masterpiece of controlled aggression. Gotta do better than that if you're gonna keep up, Kakin! Izuku laughed, the sound easy and confident. He tucked his knees, kicked off a phantom foothold of air using a burst from his legs, and shot after him. The training exercise was a complex rescue and combat scenario. Robot villains and civilian dummies were scattered throughout the industrial labyrinth. From the observation deck, Shoto Todoroki watched with his usual stoic expression, a thin plume of condensation rising from his right side. He's overthinking it, Shoto murmured, his heterochromatic eyes tracking Bakugo's explosive path. Midoriya is controlling the space. Bakugo is just trying to break it. Beside him, Achiko Uraraka leaned forward, her knuckles wide on the railing. Her heart did a familiar little flip every time Izuku moved with such grace. It wasn't just the power that captivated her, it was the precision, the care he took even in a simulated battle. He was a sledgehammer who had learned to perform surgery. Izuku weaved through the steel jungle, his mind a whirring supercomputer. Target locations triangulated. 3 civilian dummies in the collapsed sector Delta. Kakin is drawing the heavy hitter bots. Good. I can use FA gene to build kinetic energy for a rapid extraction. He landed softly on a rusted platform, the metal groaning under his weight. Below, 2 heavy-duty robots, turrets swiveling, cornered a dummy pinned under a concrete slab. He took a deep breath, the green lightning around him intensifying. He crouched, the muscles in his legs coiling. 1 breath. 2. 3. He launched himself downwards. In the split second of descent, he built and released the stored energy from FA gene, the explosive burst of speed making the air whistle. He was a green comet. He landed between the bots, the impact cratering the ground. He didn't even look at them. 2 Black Whip tendrils, thick as pythons, lashed out, crushing their optical sensors and ripping their cannons from their chassis in a screech of protesting metal. A third, more delicate whip coiled around the dummy, lifting it gently as he used his free hand to shatter the concrete slab with a single, focused 45% punch. Civilians secure. He spoke into his comm, his voice steady. Moving to extraction point, the alarm blared, signaling the end of the exercise. Izuku set the dummy down, the adrenaline beginning to fade, replaced by a satisfying hum of accomplishment. Bakugo landed nearby, steam rolling off his gauntlets. Show off, he grunted, but there was no heat in it. The vitriol of their childhood had, over the last year, been ground down into a sharp, competitive respect. Bakugo still saw Deku as his primary rival, the mountain he had to surpass, but he no longer saw him as a pebble in his shoe. You set a new record for villain takedowns, Izuku noted, offering a genuine smile. Your cluster shots are getting more precise. Damn right they are, Bakugo scoffed, turning away to hide the faintest hint of a proud smirk. Just try to keep up, nerd. Later, in the briefing room, the data was on the screen. Momo Yayorozu, ever the analyst, pointed a sleek finger at a heat map. Midoriya, your efficiency of movement was nearly perfect. You covered the most ground with the least energy expenditure. Bakugo, your offensive output was overwhelming, creating a buffer zone that allowed for safer rescue operations. Tenya Ida chopped the air with his hand, his engines idling with enthusiastic approval. A flawless synergy of offense and defense. You both exemplify the highest standards of heroism. Izuku felt a warmth spread through his chest. This was it. This was the dream. Working alongside his friends, becoming stronger together, preparing to save the world. It felt real, tangible, within his grasp. That evening, he found Uraraka on the dorm balcony, gazing at the city lights. The sprawling metropolis of Muzidafu was a glittering tapestry of life and energy, a stark contrast to the quiet calm of the UA campus. Hey, he said softly, joining her at the railing. Hey, Deku, she replied, her voice a little dreamy. You were amazing today. It's like, you're not even touching the ground anymore. He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck, a familiar habit that had never quite faded. Float helps with that. But it still feels heavy sometimes. He looked out at the city. All those lights, every single one is a person. A family. A life. All Might carried the weight of all of them. I can feel it now, just a little piece of it. It's a lot. Uraraka turned to him, her brown eyes soft with understanding. You don't have to carry it alone, you know. She gestured back towards the dorms, where the muffled sounds of Kirishima's laughter and Mina's music could be heard. You have us. Her gaze lingered on him. You have me. The space between them felt charged, filled with unspoken words and feelings that had been simmering for over a year. He saw his own awe and affection reflected in her eyes. It was a promise of a future, a quiet hope that existed alongside the roaring responsibility of his quirk. I know, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you, Achiko. Unseen by them, All Might watched from his office window. He was in his skeletal form, a cup of tea growing cold in his hand. A deep, paternal pride swelled in his heart. The boy had not only mastered the power but had also nurtured the spirit of a true hero. He had fostered unity, inspired his peers, and carried the torch with a strength and grace Tashinori Yagi could only admire. He's ready, All Might thought, a rare, genuine smile gracing his features. He is the true symbol of peace. He picked up his phone and dialed a familiar number. Hello? Inko Midoriya's cheerful voice answered. Inko, it's Tashinori. I just wanted to call. He had another training exercise today. Oh. How did Miyazuka do? He was magnificent, All Might said, his voice full of warmth. Absolutely magnificent. You should be so proud. I always am, Inko replied, and he could hear the smile in her voice. He's my hero. Oh, I have to run, Toshi. I'm just about to head out. I'm visiting a friend at Muzidafu General. Her husband just had a hip replacement. I'll be back late, so tell Izuka not to wait up. Of course. Be safe, Inko. You too. Bye now. The line clicked shut. Tashinori looked back at the boy on the balcony, now laughing at something Uraraka had said. Everything was right. Everything was peaceful. It was the last moment of peace the world would know for a very long time. The first siren was a lone, mournful cry in the distance. No one paid it much mind. Sirens were part of the city's ambient soundtrack. But then a second joined it, and a third, and soon the air was thick with a chorus of escalating panic. Inside the UA faculty lounge, every screen flashed to a breaking news report. The image was shaky, filmed on a citizen's phone. A massive plume of black smoke was billowing from the industrial district on the city's western edge. We have unconfirmed reports of an explosion at the Muzidafu petrochemical plant, a frantic news anchor reported. Then Aizawa's phone rang. It was the Hero Public Safety Commission. His face, usually placid and bored, tightened into a mask of grim focus. What's the situation? All Might asked, his voice already dropping to a serious tone. It's coordinated, Aizawa said, his eyes scanning a data feed on his tablet. A villain attack. They've hit the plant, but that's a diversion. The geological sensors are going insane. There are seismic charges going off along the fault line under the central district. He looked up, his expression dire. They're targeting the hospital. As if on cue, the news feed switched to a helicopter shot of Muzidafu General Hospital. The towering building was visibly shaking, cracks spiderwebbing across its glass and steel facade. Then a third alert screamed from the command center. A bullet train, rerouted due to the seismic activity, had its tracks blown out. It was now careening off its elevated rail, directly towards the St. Jude's orphanage. 3 disasters. 3 impossible choices. It was a nightmare scenario designed by a devil. "Get me Midoriya, Bakugo, and Todoroki," Aizawa commanded into his comms. "Full emergency deployment authorization. This is a code Omega." The trio were in the common room when the call came. The casual atmosphere evaporated in an instant. They suited up in silence, the only sounds the click of armor and the hiss of support gear locking into place. As Izuku pulled on his gloves, he felt the hum of One for All, a restless beast eager to be unleashed. He felt no fear, only a cold, sharp focus. This was the job. This was what he was built for. As they sprinted towards the gates, Aizawa met them. "The situation is a triad attack. Chemical plant, hospital, bullet train. Pro-heroes are stretched thin. You are the fastest and strongest assets we have in the immediate vicinity." Izuku's mind was already running the calculations, the probabilities, the physics. He was a leader now, not just a powerhouse. "Kaken," he said, his voice sharp and clear. "The plant. Your explosions can create directed vents for the chemical pressure, prevent a full-scale detonation." "Go," Bakugo just nodded, a feral grin on his face. "About time!" He blasted off, a human missile aimed at the plume of smoke. "Todoroki-kun!" "The train. Your ice is the only thing that can create a ramp and braking system fast enough." "Go!" Shoto met his gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. "On it!" He took off, a trail of frost forming in his wake. That left the hospital. The most complex, the most delicate, the most densely populated. The place where one wrong move meant hundreds of lives. "I'll take the hospital," Izuku said, turning to Aizawa. Aizawa grabbed his shoulder, his grip surprisingly strong. "Problem child. Be careful. The intel suggests this attack was designed. It's too precise." "I will," Izuku promised, and then he was gone. He pushed One for All to 50%. The world became a green-tinted blur. He was crossing city blocks in single leaps, the wind screaming past his ears. The sounds of chaos grew louder, the groaning of stressed metal, the shattering of glass, and the screams. So many screams. He arrived at Muzurifu General to a scene from hell. The 15-story building was swaying like a drunkard, shedding glass and concrete like dandruff. Panic-stricken civilians and staff were trying to flee, but the exits were blocked by rubble. Izuku didn't hesitate. "I am here!" he roared, his voice amplified by One for All, a sonic boom of pure reassurance. It was All Might's line, but he had earned the right to use it. For a moment, the panic subsided, all eyes turning to the green and black figure who had descended from the sky. His mind worked faster than ever. "Everyone, clear the front entrance! I'm going to make a path!" He landed, punched the ground, and the shockwave pulverized the debris blocking the main doors. Black whip tendrils shot out, forming a protective canopy to shield the fleeing people from falling wreckage. He began his work, a whirlwind of rescue. He zipped through the collapsing structure, his danger sense a constant, high-pitched scream in the back of his skull. It guided him through falling ceilings and past buckling walls. He pulled a nurse from a collapsing operating room, carried a group of children from the pediatric ward, and reinforced a load-bearing wall with a lattice of black whip just long enough for a dozen people to scramble past. He was saving lives. He was succeeding. But the building was dying faster. "Deku-senpai!" A voice crackled over his comm. It was Ryusei Toga, a third-year UE student on his work-study, a boy with a minor teleportation quirk. He was interning with a pro-agency assigned to the hospital district. "The west wing is gone. The foundations on the north side are pure dust. We can't." "Hold on, Ryusei. I'm on my way," Izuku yelled, depositing another group of survivors outside. He shot back into the building, a green blur of determination. He found Ryusei on the 7th floor, desperately trying to teleport patients out one by one, his face pale with exertion. The floor beneath them buckled violently. Get them out! Izuku ordered, bracing his hands against the ceiling, pushing back against thousands of tons of concrete and steel with raw power. His muscles screamed, his bones creaked, the green lightning around him flared. I'll hold it, Ryusei nodded, grabbing a patient. Thank you, senpai. He vanished in a flicker of blue light, and reappeared seconds later. He did this 3 times. On the 4th, a massive support pillar above them finally gave way. Danger sense shrieked. Izuku shoved Ryusei and the patient he was holding with a black whip tendril, throwing them clear. He tried to catch the pillar, but it was too much, too fast. It crashed down, and the last thing Izuku heard over the comm was Ryusei's terrified, abruptly silenced scream. The weight was apocalyptic. Izuku roared, pushing his quirk to 60, then 70%. Pain, white-hot and absolute, shot through his arms and back. But he held. He was holding the building up. He was a human atlas, and for a moment, he thought he could do it. He could hold it until everyone was out. Then his private comm, a direct line only a few people had, buzzed in his ear. A number he didn't recognize. He ignored it. It buzzed again, persistent. Annoyed, he activated it. This is Deku, I'm a little busy. A voice, electronically distorted but dripping with a calm, horrifying amusement, answered him. I can see that. Such a fine hero. Trying to be everywhere at once. A truly noble effort. Izuku's blood ran cold. He knew that cadence. That malevolent stillness. All for one, he snarled, the name tasting like ash. The very same, the voice purred. I'm simply a concerned observer. I must say, your choice to focus on the hospital was so very predictable. So very you. Always trying to save the most people. But you see, Izuku Midoriya, the key to a truly elegant trap isn't the mechanism. It's the bait. A new, specific dread began to coil in Izuku's gut, colder and heavier than the tons of concrete above him. You chose the hospital, all for one continued, his voice like a scalpel dissecting Izuku's soul. A noble choice. But did you know who was visiting today? Such a devoted mother, coming all this way to see an old friend. She was so proud of you, you know. She told everyone her son was the next All Might. No, 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 no. The strength in his arms faltered. The building groaned, sinking an inch. Mom? Visiting a friend? Musudafu General? All Might's phone call. Her voice. I'm visiting a friend at Musudafu General. The visitor's wing is in the northeast corner, All for One whispered, a phantom in his ear. It was the first part of the foundation we vaporized. Just a little insurance, in case you were performing too well. The world dissolved. The screams, the groaning steel, the roaring of his own power, it all faded into a deafening silence. All that existed was All for One's voice, and the image it painted in his mind, his mother, smiling, caught in the heart of the destruction he had chosen to engage. He had run to her, and in doing so, had been too busy to save her. His strength shattered. Not his physical strength. His will. The pillar of his spirit, the foundation of his heroism, crumbled to dust. The ceiling above him gave way. He was thrown downwards through floor after floor as the entire northern half of the hospital pancaked, a cataclysmic implosion of steel, concrete, and lives. He was buried in the rubble, his body battered but protected by the immense power of One for All. When he finally blasted his way out, crawling from the tomb he had failed to prevent, he emerged into a graveyard. The entire wing was gone. A mountain of debris stood where hundreds of rooms, hundreds of people, had been moments before. Dust hung in the air so thick it was like a gray fog, muffling the world in a shroud of failure. His calm was silent. Ryusei was gone. The people on the upper floors were gone. His mother. He stumbled through the wreckage, his legs trembling. He saw a first responder, her face covered in blood and dust, staring numbly at a data pad. The list. Izuku rasped, his throat raw. The visitors list. She looked up at him, her eyes hollow. She didn't seem to recognize the hero in front of her. She just pointed a trembling finger at the screen. We only have a partial list from the check-in system. So many. He took the pad. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely read the names. But he found it almost instantly, as if the universe wanted to twist the knife. Midoriya Inko. Visitor. Roommate 14. The data pad slipped from his fingers and clattered onto a twisted piece of rebar. It was true. It was his fault. He had made a choice. He had prioritized. He had played the hero. And in doing so, he had led his own mother to her death. He had failed her. He had failed Ryusei. He had failed the hundreds of people now buried under his feet. He had failed All Might. He had failed everyone. The quiet that had filled his head was now a single, deafening thought, a mantra of self-hatred. My fault. My fault. I chose. I failed. I killed her. I killed my mother. Something inside him snapped. It was not a clean break, but a splintering, shattering eruption. The vast, oceanic reservoir of One for All, a power built on hope, sacrifice, and the will to save, was suddenly flooded with a new, infinitely potent fuel, the absolute, bottomless despair and incandescent rage of a broken boy. The 8 vestiges of the previous users, silent partners in his soul, screamed in unison. They felt the shift, the corruption. The quirk was reacting to the trauma, to the gaping black hole of grief that had just opened in their host's heart. The stockpiled power, accumulated over a century, began to curdle. The singularity, the theoretical breaking point All Might had feared, was here. And it was not an explosion. It was a mutation. A transformation. A protocol was being triggered. A contingency for a failure so absolute that the host's will to save was supplanted by an all-consuming need to destroy. The world had broken Izuku Midoriya. Now, he would break the world. A low groan escaped his lips. The green lightning that perpetually danced around him began to flicker, like a dying fluorescent bulb. It sputtered, turning a sickly, jaundiced yellow. Then, with a sound like tearing fabric, it bled into a horrifying, wrathful crimson. A survivor, a doctor who had crawled from the wreckage 100 feet away, stared in terror. The hero, Deku, was on his knees in the epicenter of the devastation. His body was convulsing. The red lightning crackling around him was no longer just an aura. It was a cage of pure energy, and it was growing more intense, more violent. Izuku's groan of grief deepened, the sound losing its human quality. It twisted, dropping in pitch, becoming a guttural, chest-rumbling snarl of pure animal fury. He threw his head back, and the sound that erupted from his throat was not a scream of sorrow. It was a roar of cosmic agony and unbound rage that shattered the remaining windows for a mile in every direction. His body began to change. His hero costume, already torn, was ripped asunder from the inside. His muscles swelled, expanding at an unnatural rate, dense and gray, splitting the green fabric at the seams. His very skeleton was contorting. There was a series of wet, sickening cracks as his bones grew, thickened, and then pierced through his own skin. Gray, jagged, bone-like protrusions erupted from his shoulders, his back, and the knuckles of his clenching fists. His skin, where it was visible, was losing its color, turning a pale, corpse-like gray that rapidly darkened into the shade of stone. His form swelled, his height increasing by feet, his frame broadening into that of a hulking, unstoppable behemoth. He was no longer recognizable as a boy. He was becoming a monster. A weapon. A force of nature. Through the dust and the terrifying red lightning, the doctor watched as the creature that was once Deku slowly, unsteadily, got to its feet. It stood there for a moment, a silhouette of ruin against the backdrop of the ruin it had failed to prevent. Then, its head snapped up. Its eyes, once bright, hopeful, emerald green, snapped open. They were no longer eyes. They were twin pools of solid, burning, malevolent red. There was no pupil. No iris. Only the blank, bottomless, hateful glow of a star collapsing into a black hole. There was no Izuku Midoriya left. Not on the surface. There was only Doomsday. The silence that followed the roar was more terrifying than the sound itself. It was a dead, heavy quiet, the kind that follows a pressure wave detonation, leaving ears ringing and lungs aching. Dr. Kenji Tanaka, a general surgeon who had somehow survived the collapse of the West Wing, lay pinned by a steel beam, his own leg a mess of crushed bone and torn flesh. He had watched the hero Deku fall to his knees. He had heard the scream of grief. and he had borne witness to the unholy transfiguration that followed. The creature that stood where the boy had been was an affront to biology. It was immense, easily 9 feet tall, with a physique that defied anatomy. Its muscles were not the defined, functional shapes of a human bodybuilder, but brutalist slabs of gray, stone-like flesh, knotted and unnaturally dense. Jagged, bone-white spurs jutted from its spine like a desecrated stegosaurus. Larger, sharper spikes crowned its shoulders and studded its massive, stone-gray knuckles. Its feet were heavy, clawed things that cracked the asphalt just by standing on it. The tattered, pathetic remnants of a hero costume clung to its monstrous frame, the vibrant green a mockery of the hope it once represented, and the lightning. The sickly, blood-red energy was no longer a crackling aura. It was a storm, a chaotic web of crimson power that lashed out at the surrounding debris, vaporizing concrete and melting steel with indiscriminate fury. It was the physical manifestation of pure, undiluted rage. Dr. Tanaka held his breath, a primal fear seizing his heart. The creature's head, a brutish, almost skull-like shape with a heavy brow, slowly swiveled. Its gaze, those 2 solid orbs of burning red, swept across the graveyard of the hospital. There was no thought in that gaze, no recognition. It was the vacant, absolute stare of a natural disaster. It was like looking into the heart of a supernova. The first official responders arrived a minute later. 2 police cruisers and an ambulance, sirens wailing, skidded to a halt at the edge of the devastation. They were followed by the pro-hero Death Arms, his powerful physique seeming puny in comparison to the scene before him. "What in the hell?" Death Arms breathed, his eyes wide. He saw the hulking gray figure standing motionless in the center of the wreckage. "Is that the villain who did this?" A police captain, Akamatsu, leaned out of his cruiser, megaphone in hand. "Sir, initial reports said the hero Deku was handling this area." "That's not Deku," Death Arms stated grimly, cracking his knuckles. "That's the target. All units, set up a perimeter. We need containment, now!" The response was textbook. A special operations team rolled up in an armored van, deploying a high-tensile net launcher. Firefighters aimed their hoses, not with water, but with industrial-grade containment foam, a thick, rapidly hardening substance designed to subdue powerful villains. "Fire!" Akamatsu commanded. Streams of thick, white foam shot out, converging on the gray monster. It was a perfect shot. The creature was engulfed in a massive, growing mound of the stuff. For a moment, there was silence. The heroes and police officers exchanged looks of cautious optimism. "Is that it?" a young officer asked. The mound of foam began to glow from within, a pulsing, furious red. A low, vibrating hum filled the air, escalating in pitch until it was a physical pressure against their eardrums. Then, with a deafening roar, the foam didn't just break, it sublimated. It vanished in a flash of red light and searing heat, turning directly from solid to superheated gas. The creature stood in the same spot, unharmed. It hadn't even flinched. The heat wave that rolled off it was intense, forcing the frontline responders to shield their faces. It took its first step. The ground shook. It was a slow, ponderous movement, like a mountain deciding to take a walk. "Net team, now!" Death Arms roared. A volley of nets, woven with carbon nanotubes and steel alloy, shot out, wrapping around the creature's torso and legs. The anchors fired into the ground, drilling deep into the concrete. The monster was tethered. It paused, looking down at the nets with what might have been confusion if its face were capable of expression. It tugged one of the cables with its left hand. The cable, rated to hold 20 tons, snapped with a sound like a rifle shot. It took another step, and the remaining nets and anchors were torn from the ground as if they were threads of cotton. The armored van they were attached to being dragged several feet with a screech of tortured metal. This was no longer a containment operation. It was a slaughter waiting to happen. The creature began to move, its path seemingly random. It ignored the police and heroes, instead lumbering towards a half-collapsed parking garage. Its fist, the size of a small car engine, swung lazily and smashed into a support pillar. The entire structure groaned, swayed, and then came crashing down in a thunderous avalanche of concrete and steel. It was destruction for destruction's sake. Mindless. Absolute. A news helicopter, braving the chaos, hovered a few hundred yards away, its camera zoomed in. The footage was being broadcast live across the nation, across the world. We are looking at an unidentified entity," the reporter stammered, her voice shaking. "It has appeared at the site of the Unauthorized General Hospital collapse. Pro-heroes are on the scene, but their efforts appear to be having no effect." The creature's head snapped up, its blank red eyes locking onto the helicopter. It was as if the noise had finally registered as an annoyance. Its arm, a pillar of gray muscle and bone, swung back. It ripped a mangled piece of rebar-laced concrete from the ground, a chunk the size of a sedan, and hurled it. The projectile flew with impossible speed and accuracy. The pilot screamed. The concrete slab smashed through the tail rotor, and the helicopter spun wildly out of control, crashing into a nearby office building in a bloom of fire and black smoke. A collective gasp of horror rippled through the heroes on the ground. "Engage! Don't let it get into the civilian sector!" Death Arms yelled, charging forward. He was a hero known for his immense physical strength. He threw a punch, his masterpiece, a blow that could dent a bank vault door. His fist connected with the creature's ribs. The sound was not the satisfying crunch of a well-landed blow. It was a dull, wet thud, like punching a side of granite wrapped in meat. Death Arms cried out, stumbling back, clutching his arm. His knuckles were shattered, his wrist bent at an unnatural angle. The creature hadn't even budged. It simply turned its massive head, its red eyes settling on him. For the first time, it was focusing on a hero. It raised its hand, palm open. Death Arms was frozen in terror. He saw his death in those burning red voids. Suddenly, a blur of green wood shot past him. Lacquered chain prison, Kamui Woods, arriving with a cadre of other pros including Empty Lady and Edge Shot, had sprung into action. His arm morphed into a lattice of rapidly growing branches, weaving a thick, powerful cage around the monster in seconds. It was his signature move, a technique that had captured dozens of powerful villains. "Hold it there, Kamui!" Empty Lady yelled, already beginning to grow to her gigantified size. Inside the wooden dome, the creature was still. Then, a single, bone-studded fist punched through the wall of lacquered wood. Then another. It wasn't breaking out. It was walking out. The wood, stronger than steel, splintered and snapped like dry twigs under its inexorable advance. It tore its way free, splinters of Kamui's own body raining down around it. Kamui Woods let out a strangled gasp, stumbling back as the feedback pain hit him. "My wood, it's nothing to it." The creature was now fully clear of the broken prison. It turned its attention to Kamui. Before anyone could react, it lunged. It was surprisingly fast for its size, closing the 20-yard distance in 2 thunderous strides. It didn't punch. It didn't kick. It simply grabbed Kamui Wood's outstretched wooden arm with one hand and his torso with the other. "No!" Edgeshot screamed, his body thinning into a razor-sharp point as he shot towards the creature's neck. He was too slow. With a horrifying tearing sound, the creature ripped Kamui's arm from his body. The hero's scream was blood-curdling, a sound of pure agony. The wooden limb in the monster's hand dissolved back into a mangled, bleeding human arm. The creature looked at it for a second, then casually tossed it aside, its red gaze already sweeping for the next threat. Edgeshot, in his paper-thin form, stabbed into the creature's neck. His attack, which could pierce solid steel, sank half an inch into the gray flesh and then stopped, as if he'd hit diamond. The creature grunted, an annoyed sound, and swatted at its neck. The kinetic force of the casual backhand sent Edgeshot flying, his body forcibly reverting to its normal shape as he slammed into the side of a building with enough force to crater the brickwork. He slumped to the ground, unconscious and broken. Empty Lady, now at her full height, towered over the scene. Her face was a mask of shock and fury. "You bastard!" she roared, her voice booming across the district. She brought her foot down, a canyon cannon aimed to crush the monster into a paste. The ground buckled under the force of the stomp. Dust and debris flew everywhere. When the dust settled, the creature was still standing. It had caught her foot. Its knees were slightly bent, the ground beneath it shattered, but it was holding her massive foot in its 2 hands. Then, with a guttural roar, it heaved. Empty Lady, all 50 feet of her, was lifted off balance. She shrieked in shock as the monster, with a surge of impossible strength, swung her around and threw her. She flew through the air like a discarded doll, crashing into a row of evacuated residential buildings, leveling them completely. The remaining heroes, a dozen pros and their sidekicks, were paralyzed. They had witnessed 3 of Japan's top-ranking heroes get neutralized in less than a minute. They weren't fighting a villain. They were fighting an extinction-level event. The creature, its immediate area cleared of annoyances, resumed its random walk. It smashed a bus shelter. It tore a streetlight from the ground and bent it into a pretzel. It was a toddler in a god's body, throwing a tantrum in a city of sandcastles. Its path was chaotic, destructive, and utterly without purpose. Miles away, the fires at the petrochemical plant were being vented into the sky in controlled bursts of orange flame. Katsuki Bakugo stood on a rooftop, his gauntlets smoking, his face streaked with soot. He had done it. He had prevented a city-leveling explosion. He felt the familiar, savage thrill of victory. "All clear over here, you damn extras!" He barked into his calm. "The big bad is contained. What's your status, icy hot? Did you manage not to screw it up?" Shoto Todoroki's voice came back, calm and steady as always, but with an undercurrent of strain. "The train is stopped. The ramp held. There are no casualties at the orphanage." He stood on a massive, curving wall of ice that had guided the bullet train to a screeching, scraping halt just yards from the building. Children were being led out by shaken but grateful caretakers. "And Deku?" Bakugo demanded. "Report, you damn nerd! You better not have let those other 2 beat your score." Silence. "Deku?" Bakugo repeated, a flicker of irritation sparking in his chest. The central comm channel, usually a stream of professional chatter, was a mess of panicked, overlapping voices. "Unidentified hostile. Multiple heroes down. Repeat, Endeavor-class threat. At the hospital collapse site. It's unstoppable." Bakugo's blood ran cold. Hospital collapse site. That's where he went. "Shoto," Bakugo said, his voice dropping the arrogant swagger, replaced by a low urgency. "I'm heading for the hospital. Meet me there." "On my way," Todoroki replied instantly. He needed no further explanation. Bakugo didn't wait. He aimed his palms behind him and blasted off, a streak of orange against the smoky sky. His mind raced. What the hell happened? Did he get trapped? Injured? That damn idiot, always pushing himself too far. He pictured finding Deku pinned under rubble, bruised but alive, giving that stupid, determined grin of his. He'd yell at him, call him a reckless moron, and then help him up. That's how it would go. It had to. Todoroki was a slick of ice, sliding through the city streets at incredible speed. He was a creature of logic, but a cold knot of dread was tightening in his stomach. The panic in the comms was something he'd only heard once before, during the Kamino Ward incident. They arrived at the perimeter of the disaster zone at almost the same time. The scene was worse than any news report could convey. It looked like a war zone. The smoldering crater of a helicopter crash, the flattened remains of buildings, the groaning, broken bodies of pro-heroes being dragged away by medics. And in the center of it all, the cause. Bakugo landed on a rooftop, his boots crunching on gravel. He stared. His mind refused to process what he was seeing. That thing, that gray, colossal monster, wreathed in blood-red lightning, casually backhanding an armored vehicle and sending it tumbling end over end. "What is that?" he whispered, the words catching in his throat. Todoroki landed beside him, a plume of frost dissipating around him. His bicolored eyes were wide, scanning the creature, the destruction, the energy signature. The raw power rolling off it was suffocating, a physical pressure that made the air thick and hard to breathe. "That power," Todoroki murmured, his right side instinctively flaring with fire to ward off the sudden chill of fear. "It feels familiar." Bakugo's eyes narrowed. He was looking past the monstrous form, past the bone spikes and the gray skin. He was looking at the energy. That chaotic, lashing lightning. He had seen it 1,000 times before, in 1,000 spars. He had seen it surrounding his rival, his friend. But it was always green. Bright, hopeful, heroic green. Now it was red. The color of hate. But it was the same energy. "No!" Bakugo breathed, A single word of absolute denial. No. It can't be. He saw a flash of dark green fabric, torn and flapping from the creature's massive shoulder. He saw a glint of red from a piece of metal armor half melted into its stony flesh, the distinctive shape of Deku's iron-soled boots. And in that moment, the impossible became undeniable. The world tilted on its axis, and every certainty Bakugo had ever known shattered into a million pieces. DKU! The name was ripped from his soul, a sound of pure, unadulterated shock and fury. It was not a question. It was an accusation. An order. A plea. It echoed across the ruined landscape, silencing the panicked chatter of the responders. For a moment, the creature paused in its mindless destruction. It had just crushed the front of a fire truck in its fist. It stood still, the metal groaning as it slowly unclenched its hand. Bakugo saw the pause and a sliver of desperate hope ignited in his chest. He heard me. He's in there. He launched himself from the rooftop, ignoring Todoroki's sharp. Bakugo, wait! He landed in the street 100 feet from the monster, his stance wide, his hands sparking. DKU, you bastard! What the hell are you doing? Stop this! Stop this right now! The creature's head tilted, its red eyes settling on the small, defiant figure in orange and black. There was no flicker of recognition. No sign of the boy within. It was the gaze of a predator looking at a noisy insect. It turned its body, the movement cracking the pavement. It wasn't preparing to attack. It was simply turning to continue its path of destruction, and Bakugo was now in that path. Don't you ignore me! Bakugo screamed, his voice cracking with a mix of rage and a terror he would never admit to. I'm talking to you, you damn nerd! As the creature took a step, its massive foot came down near a slab of broken wall. Its leg brushed against it, and the slab, weighing several tons, was knocked sideways. It spun through the air, directly at Bakugo. It wasn't an attack. It was an accident. A consequence. And that was the most horrifying part. The creature was so powerful, so destructive, that its incidental movements were lethal. Bakugo's eyes widened. He was a master of mobility, but he was rooted to the spot, his mind unable to reconcile the image of his friend with the impending reality of his death. The shadow of the concrete slab fell over him. So this is it, huh? Killed by that idiot. A wall of ice, thick and jagged as a glacier, erupted from the ground in front of him. The concrete slab smashed into it with the force of a freight train. The sound was a deafening explosion of shattering ice and pulverizing rock. The ice wall spiderwebbed with cracks, groaning under the strain, but it held. Shards of ice and concrete rained down around them. Todoroki stood behind Bakugo, his right arm outstretched, trembling slightly from the effort. A cloud of condensation billowed around him. Get back! Todoroki said, his voice flat and cold, but his eyes were filled with a horrified certainty. That is not Midoriya. Bakugo was breathing heavily, his heart hammering against his ribs. He stared at the cracked ice wall, then past it, at the creature that hadn't even slowed down. It had already taken another 2 steps, its back now to them. It had swatted him aside like a fly and hadn't even noticed. He looked down at the ground and saw something amidst the debris. A small piece of scorched metal plating and a torn piece of a specialized glove. It was from the wreckage of Deku's right-hand gauntlet, the support item he had been so proud of, a gift from Melissa's shield. Bakugo's composure, held together by rage and denial, finally broke. The explosive fury drained out of him, leaving a hollow, freezing void. Deku! He whispered, his voice trembling. He fell to his knees, his own gauntlets feeling impossibly heavy. He had spent his entire life chasing him, screaming at him, fighting him, trying to surpass him. He had finally acknowledged him as an equal, a friend. And now, this. Bakugo. Todoroki's voice was soft beside him. We cannot fight it. We need to fall back. We need a new plan. Bakugo didn't respond. He just stared at the creature's retreating back. The rage began to return, but it was different now. It was cold, despairing. It was the rage of impotence, the rage of watching his entire world burn down, and the arsonist was the one person he had sworn to beat, to save, to stand beside. The monster continued its walk, leveling everything in its path. A building, a car, a statue in a small park, it all met the same fate. Pulverized. Erased. Then it stopped. It stood in the middle of a wide, four-lane boulevard, utterly still. The red lightning around it pulsed rhythmically, like a hellish heartbeat. The heroes, the police, Bakugo and Todoroki, everyone held their breath, waiting to see what it would do next. Its head, which had been lolling slightly, lifted. It wasn't looking at anything nearby. It was as if it was staring at the horizon. Its posture changed. The random, lumbering gait was gone. Its stance became more solid, more planted. It was sensing something. A concentration of power. A beacon in the distance. The place where One for All had been nurtured. The place where All Might was. The creature's body tensed. It let out a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the very bones of the city. It was no longer the sound of mindless rage. It was the sound of purpose. It took a step. The ground boomed. Another step. It was marching. Each footfall was deliberate, earth-shaking. Its path was no longer random. It was a straight, unwavering line, pointed northeast. Todoroki did a quick mental calculation of the trajectory, and a new, more profound wave of dread washed over him. Bakugo, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Where it's going? Bakugo looked up, following the monster's determined path towards the horizon. He knew that direction better than he knew his own home. There was only one thing of significance that way. The monster was marching towards Yue High School. The broadcast image flickered, a mosaic of digital artifacts struggling to keep up with the chaos it was depicting. On every screen in Japan, and soon the world, the same apocalyptic scene played out. A grey colossus, wreathed in blood-red lightning, carved a path of methodical destruction through the heart of Mizurufu. The footage was a nauseating mix of shaky aerial shots from news helicopters keeping a terrified distance, and grainy citizen phone videos that cut out abruptly. Kiana Ito, the lead anchor for HNN, had been on air for 2 hours straight. Her professional composure was a thin, brittle veneer over a face pale with shock. Her voice, usually a smooth and reassuring baritone, was strained. We are continuing our live coverage of the unprecedented crisis in Mizurufu, she said, her eyes fixed on the teleprompter, though her mind was clearly on the horrific images playing out on the monitor beside her. The unidentified entity, which emerged from the site of the Mizurufu General Hospital collapse, has thus far proven completely impervious to efforts by our nation's top heroes. They replayed the footage that was already seared into the nation's consciousness. Death Arms, his arm broken, being dragged away by medics. Kamui Woods screaming in agony as he was dismembered. Empty Lady, a giantess, being thrown like a child's toy, leveling 3 city blocks. The images were stark, brutal, and communicated a terrifyingly simple message. Japan's guardians were helpless. Online speculation is running rampant. Kiana continued, her gaze dropping to a tablet in front of her. A hashtag Mizurufu Doomsday is now the #1 trend worldwide. It's a name born of the sheer terror this thing inspires. Authorities have yet to classify the threat, but Doomsday, it seems frighteningly appropriate. In the 1A Alliance dorm common room, there was absolute silence. The usual vibrant energy was gone, replaced by a thick, suffocating dread. 20 students, the future of heroics, were huddled around the large television, their faces illuminated by the grim spectacle. Mina was crying silently into Kirishima's shoulder. Kaminari stared blankly, his mouth slightly agape. Ida stood ramrod straight, but his hands were clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. Achiko Uraraka felt like she was drowning. She recognized the tattered remnants of the costume. The flashes of green fabric clinging to that monstrous gray form. She remembered laughing with him on the balcony just hours ago. The memory was so clear, so warm, that the cognitive dissonance was a physical pain in her chest. That can't be, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Deku-kun, he would never, but the evidence was undeniable. The way it moved, the familiar yet corrupted lightning, it was him. A terrible, twisted, broken version of him. What happened to him? Kirishima asked, his voice rough with disbelief. What could do that to a guy like Midoriya? No one had an answer. They just watched, helpless, as the monster on the screen continued its inexorable march. Its path was a ruler straight line of devastation, and it was pointed directly at them. In the subterranean command center of UA High, the atmosphere was colder than a morgue. A holographic map of the Kanto region dominated the central table, a blinking red icon labeled Threat, Doomsday moving with terrifying steadiness across it. Projections of its path, speed, and estimated time of arrival to UA scrolled on a nearby screen. Niza stood on his chair at the head of the table, his fur bristling, his usual cheerful demeanor completely absent. His small black eyes were fixed on the data streams, processing 1,000 variables a second. Aizawa stood beside him, his arms crossed, his face a grim mask. Bakugo and Todoroki have disengaged and are falling back to the designated rally point, Aizawa reported, his voice a low growl. They confirmed the visual identification. It's Midoriya. Toshinori Yagi, skeletal and frail, sat slumped in a chair, watching the main monitor. He didn't seem to be breathing. On the screen was a looped satellite thermal image of the hospital wing collapsing. Then, a biosignature scan of the area showed one overwhelmingly powerful life sign emerging from the rubble. His life sign. Izuku's life sign. My fault. The thought was a relentless drumbeat against the inside of his skull. I gave him this power. I pushed him. I told him he could be a hero. He remembered the phone call with Inko. I'm visiting a friend at Muzurifu General. The words echoed in the silence of his mind, each one a hammer blow to his already shattered heart. He had praised her son, told her how magnificent he was, just before the trap she was in had sprung. All for one hadn't just targeted Izuku. He had targeted everyone Izuku loved. He had engineered this tragedy with the precision of a watchmaker. The Hero Public Safety Commission president is on line 1. A technician announced. Niza nodded. Put her on screen. The face of a severe-looking woman in her late 50s appeared on a side monitor. Her expression was granite. Principal Nizu. What is your analysis? The heroes we sent were some of our best. They were incapacitated in seconds. Our analysis, Niza said, his voice dangerously calm, is that conventional tactics are not only ineffective, they are counterproductive. A new window popped up, a secure video link from Island. The face of David Shield appeared, looking haggard. Behind him, his daughter Melissa could be seen frantically working at another console. David, report, Niza requested. David Shield adjusted his glasses, his eyes red-rimmed from staring at screens. We've been analyzing every frame of footage you've sent. The energy signature is, without question, a derivative of One for All, but it's mutated. Corrupted. The output is off the charts, exponentially higher than anything young Midoriya has ever willingly produced. He brought up a series of analytical diagrams. Observe. When Death Arms struck the entity, our kinetic sensors registered a momentary impact before his hand broke. The creature's subdermal tissue density increased by over 300% in a fraction of a second. It didn't just tank the blow, it adapted to it. He switched to the clip of Kamui Woods. Here. Edshot's piercing attack. The initial penetration was successful, but the creature's epidermis and muscular fascia instantly restructured at a molecular level, becoming denser than diamond. It didn't just heal, it evolved. Recovery Girl, standing beside Toshinori, spoke up, her voice trembling with a mixture of clinical fascination and absolute horror. It's a form of hyperreactive regeneration, but it's not just restoring damaged tissue. It's improving it. Reinforcing it against the specific trauma it just received. Every attack you land on it is like giving it a vaccine. You are teaching it how to be invincible. David Shield nodded grimly. That's the horrifying truth of it. We believe the quark singularity you feared, All Might, has occurred. The immense emotional trauma, the grief, the rage, the self-loathing from his failure, acted as a catalyst. One for All's core function is to stockpile and accumulate. It seems it has begun stockpiling not just power, but his negative emotional state. It has created a feedback loop. Threat is met with adaptation. Adaptation requires energy. The rage provides infinite energy. It's a perpetual motion machine of destruction. We're not fighting a person anymore, David concluded, his voice heavy. We're fighting a biological algorithm. A Doomsday protocol hardwired into the quirk itself. Taishinori finally moved. He pushed himself to his feet, his frail body shaking. He looked at Nizu, at Aizawa, and the assembled faculty. The light in his eyes, the embers of all might that always remained, was gone. There was only a hollow, desolate emptiness. He warned me. Taishinori rasped, his voice a dry, cracking whisper. The first user. In a vision. He showed me the vestiges, and the darkness. He took a shaky breath, the confession spilling out of him like blood from a mortal wound. One for all was never just a quirk to be passed on. It was a burden. It was created for one purpose, to defeat my master's nemesis, all for one. It began with two brothers, one who could take quirks, and one who could give them. He told them everything. The complete, unvarnished history. The century-long war fought in the shadows. The previous users, their lives cut short. Nana Shimura, his master, her tragic end at the hands of all for one. And the secret he had kept locked away, the quirk's singularity theory. The vestiges within one for all have been warning me. He continued, his gaze unfocused, as if he were seeing ghosts in the room. As the quirk accumulated power with each generation, it grew more complex, more volatile. They feared it would one day become too great for any normal human body to contain. It would break its vessel. He looked directly at Aizawa, his eyes pleading for an understanding he didn't deserve. I thought young Midoriya was different. His selflessness, his drive to save. I thought his spirit was strong enough, but I was a fool. I didn't account for his heart. He clenched his fists, his knuckles white. His capacity for empathy, for compassion, it's greater than anyone I have ever known. And all for one used it. He turned the boy's greatest strength into the trigger for the world's destruction. He finally broke, his shoulders slumping. He looked like a puppet with its strings cut. I chose him. I gave him this power. I told him he could save everyone. I did this. I did this to him. I took Inko Midoriya's beautiful, kind son, and I turned him into a monster. The silence in the command center was absolute. No one offered words of comfort. There were none to give. Aizawa simply stared at him, his expression unreadable, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. He was seeing the full, horrifying weight of the power his student had been carrying. Nizu was the first to speak, his voice cutting through the despair with cold, hard practicality. Your guilt is a luxury we cannot afford right now, All Might. What's done is done. The entity you named Doomsday is en route. It has adapted to kinetic impact, piercing attacks, and high-energy foam. It is marching with a purpose. We have approximately 93 minutes until it reaches the outer wards of UA. The HPSC president's face was grim. We are mobilizing every available hero. Endeavor is en route. Hawks is coordinating aerial assets. The top heroes from the Kansai and Hokkaido regions are being transported by military jet. We've even put out an emergency request to our international partners. A new voice, with an American accent, cut in from her channel. The United States government offers its full support. The successor to Star and Stripe, a hero codenamed Patriot, is wheels up and heading your way. But his ETA is 4 hours. He won't make it in time for the initial engagement. Then the initial engagement falls to us. Endeavor's gruff voice boomed from a new comms channel as his icon appeared on the map, moving at incredible speed to intercept Doomsday's path. What's the plan, Nizu? The plan is a desperate one, Nizu admitted. We cannot out-finesse it. We cannot contain it. Logic dictates that every blow we land makes it stronger. However, logic also dictates that we cannot simply let it walk into a school full of children and the most populated area of the country. He pointed a small paw at the holographic map, highlighting a vast, open expanse of green land crossed by a river. The Kanto floodplains. Minimal civilian population. Open terrain. We will make our stand here. The strategy is not to defeat it in a prolonged battle. That is impossible. The strategy is an overwhelming alpha strike. We will gather every high-output hero we have, and we will hit it with everything at the exact same time. Hawk's voice joined the chorus. A decapitation strike. We try to overload its adaptive capabilities. Hit it with heat, cold, kinetic force, vibrations, everything at once. Hope that the sheer system shock is enough to put it down before it can evolve. It's a gamble, Aizawa stated flatly. It is the only move we have left on the board. Nizu countered, his beady eyes gleaming with grim resolve. Prepare the gauntlet. We will either stop it on that floodplain, or we will merely be a footnote in the story of how the world ended. The command center erupted into a flurry of organized chaos. Orders were barked. Heroes were deployed. A defensive line, perhaps the most powerful ever assembled in Japan's history, was being drawn in the dirt, a desperate attempt to halt the march of the unstoppable force. Tashinori Yagi watched it all, a ghost at the feast. He had been the symbol of peace. Now, he was the architect of the apocalypse. He could do nothing but bear witness to the consequences of his failure. The storm was red. It was not a metaphor. It was a literal, physical reality. A churning, boiling sea of crimson energy that stretched to an infinite horizon. The sky above was a vortex of blackest rage, shot through with veins of incandescent hatred that pulsed in time with a monstrous, earth-shaking heartbeat. The air itself was a scream, a constant, high-pitched shriek of grief, agony, and self-loathing so profound it had become a physical force. In the absolute center of this psychic hurricane, a boy was curled into a ball. It was Izuku Midoriya. Not the hardened second-year student, but the small, quirkless child in an all-might onesie, sobbing into his knees. He was translucent, a flickering ember of light in a universe of darkness. His form was anchored to the heart of the storm by thick, glowing red chains. They were not made of metal, but of pure, solidified emotion. A chain of failure was wrapped around his throat, choking him. A chain of grief bound his heart, crushing it. Chains of rage and despair pinned his limbs, burning his spectral skin. He was a prisoner, in his own soul. But that was not the worst of it. The worst part was that he was not alone. He was a passenger. His consciousness was lashed to the monster's senses. He was forced to see through its eyes. He saw the world through a red-tinted haze, a world of shapes and threats, devoid of context or meaning. He saw the flash of Death Arms' punch, and in the microsecond before impact, he felt the monster's body instinctively harden its flesh. He felt the sickening, wet crunch as the hero's bones shattered against his new, improved form. A wave of the monster's primal satisfaction washed over him, and it made him want to vomit. He saw Kamui Woods, a figure he had admired, a kind man he had once worked with. He felt the monster's annoyance at being caged. He felt his own phantom hands, now massive and gray, grip the hero's body, and then he felt the tear. He lived the moment of ripping a man's arm from his socket, heard the scream not just with his ears, but with his entire being. Izuku's own silent, spiritual scream was lost in the roar of the storm. He felt nothing as he was thrown by Empty Lady. The impact was just another data point for the algorithm of rage. Kinetic force from above. Reinforced spine. Thickened skull. And he felt the pull. The relentless, magnetic tug towards the northeast. It was a homing instinct, a primal need to return to the nest, the source of its power. Yue. He knew where it was going. He knew who was there. His friends. All Might. And he was the weapon that was going to destroy them all. He struggled against his chains. He pulled, he screamed, but his voice made no sound. His strength was nothing. He was a flickering candle flame trying to fight a supernova. The monster, his body, his power, paid him no mind. It was a mindless engine of destruction, and his soul was just a ghost trapped in the machine, forced to watch it run. The vestiges were there, too. They were not figures of light and wisdom anymore. They were tattered phantoms, their own forms buffeted and torn by the storm of Izuku's emotions. They were a thin, spectral wall between Izuku's flickering consciousness and the all-consuming rage. Fight, boy! The voice of the first user, Yoichi Shigaraki, was a faint whisper against the gale. You must fight. It is your heart. Your power! Nana Shimura's spectral form drifted near him, her hand outstretched, trying to offer a comfort that could not penetrate the chains. Her form was flickering, weakened. Izuku, my poor boy, what has he done to you? But their voices were whispers in a hurricane. They could shield his soul from being completely extinguished, but they could not give him control. Through the monster's eyes, Izuku saw the landscape changing. The city was giving way to suburbs, and then to open fields. The floodplains. He could feel the monster's senses detecting dozens, then hundreds of powerful energy signatures ahead. It perceived them as threats, as new data, as opportunities to learn, to evolve. Izuku's chained, spiritual form trembled. He knew what was coming. The heroes were making a stand. They were going to fight him, and he knew, with a certainty that was the purest form of despair, that they were going to lose. Every punch they threw, every blast of fire, every desperate attack would only serve to sculpt their perfect destroyer. They were forging the weapon of their own annihilation. He closed his spectral eyes, but he couldn't shut out the vision. He was still forced to see, forced to watch as the body that was once his, powered by the dream that was once his, marched towards his friends to kill them. This was his hell. Not just to be a monster, but to be aware of it. The Kanto floodplains were a verdant tapestry under the afternoon sun. The air was clean, smelling of damp earth and river water, a stark contrast to the smoke-choked skies of Muzidafu. It was a place of serene, natural beauty. Today, it was a killing field. 112 of Japan's finest pro-heroes stood arrayed in a multi-layered defensive line. They were a living pantheon of modern mythology. There was the veteran brute force of Crust, his shield quirk already encasing his arms in thick, stony plates. The impossibly fast ninja, Edge Shot, his body recovered by an emergency healing quirk but his face pale and grim, stood ready. Ryukyu, in her massive dragon form, coiled behind the front line, a reserve of draconic power. Mirko, the rabbit hero, bounced restlessly from foot to foot, her powerful legs thrumming with contained energy, her usual cocksure grin replaced by a predatory snarl, and at their very tip, a spearhead of pure elemental fury, was Endeavor. Flames licked at his shoulders and face, a controlled inferno that heated the air for 50 yards around him. His turquoise eyes were narrowed, fixed on the horizon. Hawk soared high above, a tiny speck in the vast blue sky. His feathers, spread wide, acted as a hypersensitive sensory array, feeling the vibrations in the air, tracking the enemy's approach. "He's 5 clicks out." Hawk's voice crackled over the shared comm channel, his tone stripped of all its usual lazy charm. "Maintaining steady pace. No deviation. Ground tremors are intensifying." On the ground, Endeavor clenched his fists. "Positions! Remember the plan. Alpha strike on my signal. We hit him with everything we have from every conceivable vector. Overload his systems. Do not give him a second to breathe, not a moment to adapt." He looked to his left. Shoto Todoroki stood there, his expression colder than the ice that was already beginning to creep up his right arm. He hadn't been ordered to be here, but he had refused to be anywhere else. His father had looked at him, seen the resolve in his mismatched eyes, the same stubborn fire he saw in the mirror, and had simply nodded. This was personal. "Shoto," Endeavor said, his voice a low rumble. "When I give the signal, you will create a thermal shock. Absolute zero on the ground to immobilize, full heat from me above. We create a cage of temperature extremes." "I know the plan," Shoto replied, his voice flat. Endeavor's gaze lingered on his son for a moment longer. "This is not your classmate. Do not hesitate." Shoto didn't answer. He just stared at the horizon, where a small, moving smudge was becoming visible. The ground began to tremble in earnest. It started as a low, deep vibration felt in the soles of their boots, and steadily grew into a rhythmic, earth-shaking boom. Boom! 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 The sound of a god's footfalls. The smudge grew larger, resolving into a gray, hulking shape. The crimson lightning that surrounded it was now visible even at this distance, a violent, angry nebula of destructive energy. The sheer malice rolling off it was a physical presence, a wave of psychic pressure that made the hairs on their arms stand up and a primal instinct scream at them to run. Mirko bared her teeth, a feral growl escaping her lips. "What the hell is that thing?" "It's our target," Endeavor barked, his own flames flaring brighter in response to the approaching threat. "Hold the line!" The creature, Doomsday, entered the flood plains. It didn't slow down. Its red, vacuous eyes swept over the assembled heroes, registering them as obstacles, as threats, as data points. It marched forward, its path unwavering. 300 meters! Hawks called from above. He's in the kill box! Endeavor took a deep breath, the air around him superheating. All units! Now! The world exploded. It was an alpha strike of biblical proportions. The ground erupted as heroes with seismic quirks struck in unison, attempting to shatter the earth beneath the monster's feet. Simultaneously, Shoto Todoroki slammed his right foot down. A tidal wave of ice, glittering and razor-sharp, surged forward, freezing the very air, aiming to encase the creature's lower body in a glacier. From the sky, Endeavor unleashed his ultimate move. Prominence burn! A torrent of fire, so hot it bleached the color from the sky, descended like the wrath of the sun itself. It was a concentrated blast of thermal energy that could melt skyscrapers. It engulfed the monster completely, turning the point of impact into a raging miniature star. But that was just the beginning. From the flanks, dozens of other attacks converged. Sound-based heroes unleashed concussive sonic blasts designed to rupture internal organs. Light-based heroes fired focused laser beams. A hero with a gravitational quirk increased the gravity around the monster 100-fold, trying to pin it to the ground. Crust and other physical fighters launched massive chunks of rock and earth, a barrage of improvised artillery. For a full 10 seconds, the creature was lost in a vortex of destructive power. The combined energy release was equivalent to a tactical nuke. The sound was a continuous, deafening roar. The light was blinding. The very fabric of the plains was torn asunder. The heroes poured everything they had into that initial assault. When the 10 seconds were up, they stopped, breathing heavily, their energy reserves severely depleted. A massive, glowing crater, 50 meters across, now marred the landscape. At its center was a pillar of black smoke and superheated steam. Status? Endeavor demanded, his voice hoarse. For a moment, there was silence. The smoke began to clear. A figure was standing in the center of the crater. It was charred black, its stony flesh glowing with residual heat, like cooling magma. The bone spurs on its back were partially melted, its body was hunched, and steam hissed from 100 different wounds. Shoto's eyes had been instantly vaporized. The seismic blasts had only served to create the crater it now stood in, and the gravity attack had seemingly done nothing at all. It was hurt. Severely. But it was standing. Then, as 112 heroes watched in dawning horror, it began to heal. The glowing, molten cracks in its skin cooled and sealed over. The charred blackness flaked away, revealing a new layer of skin beneath, not the stone gray from before, but a darker, almost obsidian-like carapace that seemed to absorb the light. The melted bone spurs reformed, not as they were, but thicker, sharper, and with a crystalline, heat-resistant structure. It let out a low groan, not of pain, but of processing. Then it stood up straight, its body now a full foot taller than before. It rolled its massive shoulders and let out a guttural roar that blew the remaining smoke away. A second prominence burn blast, this one from a support hero, struck it square in the chest. This time, there was no explosion of fire. The flames washed over its new, obsidian hide and simply dissipated. The attack, which would have flash-fried a normal villain, didn't even leave a scorch mark. No! Endeavor whispered, his mind reeling. It's immune. The creature's red eyes scanned the heroes who had attacked it. It had learned. In those 10 seconds, it had catalogued every single energy type, every vector of assault, and its body had rewritten its own biology to counter them. It was now functionally immune to heat-based attacks, concussive sonic force, and conventional kinetic projectiles. The gauntlet had failed. They hadn't destroyed it. They had trained it. They had given it the perfect education in how to kill them all. And now, class was in session. Doomsday moved. It wasn't the ponderous, lumbering walk from before. It was a blur of gray and red. It crossed the 300 meters separating it from the front line in the time it took for the heroes to gasp. Its first target was Crust, the shield hero who had coordinated the projectile barrage. Crust, a veteran of countless battles, reacted instantly, his shields forming a thick, overlapping barrier in front of him. Doomsday didn't even slow down. It smashed through the shields as if they were panes of sugar glass. The sound of their shattering was like a gunshot. Crust's eyes went wide with shock a fraction of a second before the monster's fist, now coated in the same obsidian material as its skin, slammed into his chest. The hero's entire torso imploded, He was dead before his body hit the ground. Panic, cold and absolute, ripped through the hero ranks. The plan had failed. The Alpha Strike had failed. Their strongest attacks had only made it stronger. Now they were facing a faster, more durable, and completely invulnerable version of the monster they had first seen. Scatter! Adopt guerrilla tactics! Don't let it pin you down! Hawk screamed from above, firing off a volley of his sharpest feathers. He aimed for the eyes, the joints, the few places that might still be vulnerable. The feathers, which could move faster than sound and pierce steel, struck the creature's face and limbs. They bounced off. They didn't ricochet. They simply hit the obsidian skin and fell to the ground, blunted and useless. The monster ignored him. Its attention was on the others. It was a predator in a field of prey. Ryukyu let out a draconic roar and charged, her massive jaws gaping to bite, her claws extended to tear. Doomsday met her charge head-on. It ducked under her snapping jaws and drove its shoulder into her chest. The impact was like two mountains colliding. A shockwave rippled through the air. Ryukyu, a beast of over 40 tons, was stopped dead in her tracks, a gasp of pain escaping her reptilian throat. Doomsday grabbed one of her legs, planted its feet, and heaved. The dragon hero was lifted from the ground and slammed back down, the impact shaking the entire floodplain. It lifted her again and used her as a club, swinging her massive body into a group of mid-tier heroes, scattering them like bowling pins. Mirko, moving in a white-hot blur of pure fury, saw an opening. "Luna T. Harris!" she screamed, launching herself into the air. She wrapped her powerful legs around the monster's neck, twisting with all her might. This was the move that had shattered the leg of a Hyan Noma. She felt a sickening resistance, then a crack. But it wasn't the monster's neck. It was her own leg. The creature's neck muscles had tensed, becoming so dense and powerful that her attack had broken her own limb against it. She screamed in agony and frustration as she was thrown off, tumbling to the ground, her leg bent at a hideous angle. Doomsday turned its attention to her, its hand raised for a final, crushing blow. A wall of ice, 100 feet high and 30 feet thick, erupted between them. Shoto stood 50 yards away, his right side completely covered in frost, his breath pluming in the air. "Get her out of there!" he yelled, pouring more and more of his power into the wall, reinforcing it, making it thicker. Doomsday looked at the wall. It didn't punch it. It didn't try to go around. It simply walked forward. Its shoulder hit the ice, and the glacier began to crack. Not with loud, explosive fractures, but with a terrifying, grinding sound, as if the ice were being turned to dust by pure, unrelenting pressure. It pushed its way through the wall, which crumbled into powder around its unstoppable form. Shoto's eyes were wide with disbelief. It didn't even slow down. "Shoto, now!" Endeavor roared. He swooped down from above, his body wreathed in his hottest flames. He landed behind Doomsday while Shoto, switching tactics, unleashed a torrent of fire from his left side. They caught the monster between them, a sandwich of hellfire. But it was useless. The obsidian skin didn't even glow. Doomsday stood in the crossfire, completely unharmed, and turned its head to look at Endeavor. This was the man whose power it had just assimilated. It seemed to recognize him as the primary source of the earlier attack. It took a step towards him. Endeavor stood his ground, unleashing a continuous blast of fire. "It's impossible! No being can withstand this heat!" Doomsday walked through the firestorm. It raised its hand, and for the first time, it did something other than punch or grab. Its mouth opened, and it let out a roar. But this was not just sound. It was a focused, concussive blast of pure force, laced with the same red energy that surrounded it. The blast hit Endeavor square in the chest. It wasn't fire. It wasn't a physical blow. It was something new. A weaponized scream. Endeavor's flame armor was shredded. He was thrown backwards 100 yards, tumbling through the air like a rag doll. He hit the ground hard, his armor shattered, blood pouring from his mouth and ears. He tried to get up, but his body wouldn't respond. His ribs were shattered, his lungs ruptured. He had been taken out by a single, casual roar. The number one hero was down. The battlefield fell silent. The remaining heroes, scattered and terrified, watched as their leader, their pillar of fire and strength, was defeated so easily. The hope that had flickered in their hearts was extinguished, replaced by the cold, black certainty of their doom. Hawks, hovering high above, felt a despair so profound it was paralyzing. He had seen All Might fall. He had seen the rise of the Paranormal Liberation Front. But he had never seen anything like this. This wasn't a fight. This was an execution. All units fall back. He whispered into the calm, his voice cracking. I repeat, all units, disengage and fall back. Operation Gauntlet is a failure. I say again, a complete failure. Shoto stared, his heart a block of ice in his chest. His father, the indomitable Endeavor, was lying broken in the dirt. This monster, this thing that wore his friend's face, had done it without effort. He looked at the monster, and for the first time, he felt true, abject terror. Doomsday turned its gaze from the fallen Endeavor. Its internal threat assessment had been updated. The primary threats had been neutralized or rendered ineffective. It no longer had any reason to remain here. It turned its body, once again facing northeast. Its mission was not complete. Its destination had not been reached. It began to walk again. It stepped over the groaning, broken body of Mirko. It walked past the crater where Crust had died. It ignored the dozens of remaining heroes, who were now too terrified to even move. They were no longer considered threats. They were insects. Irrelevant. High above, a lone satellite tracked the scene. On its screen, the icons representing Japan's greatest heroes flickered one by one, their status changing from green, active, to red, incapacitated or worse. The single, malevolent red icon of Doomsday continued its slow, steady march, leaving a trail of broken bodies and shattered hope in its wake. It was stronger now. Faster. Its skin was nigh invulnerable to heat and kinetic force. Its regenerative abilities were beyond comprehension. It could project blasts of pure, destructive energy. It had fought the strongest heroes on the planet, and had won. The world had thrown its gods at the monster. And the monster had broken them. Now, there was nothing left to stand in its way. Nothing but a school full of children.